Story 1. Hi folks, I live in Iowa. My father is a professor at the University of Northern Iowa. We have a parking system at uni, and it starts with stickers for certain professors, staff, and graduate assistants. Well, technically we have a G sticker as well, but it's kind of useless and only given out in a lottery system. Below A is B and C. Each parking lot has a huge sign that tells who can park where. My dad, the absent-minded professor, often forgot to lock his car, and one day he called me to ask if I had borrowed it. I told him no, and he started to freak out. Background about me. I went to college for security and private investigations, but was working at the time as loss prevention. I only lived a few blocks away from his office and knew he would be raging and going a little off the wall at the indignity of having his sticker stolen. When I got to the building, I went up to the 6th floor and to his office. He was busy calling other professors, asking them if they saw anything. I asked if he called campus police, and he said no. Face-palm moment, I told him what's where we needed to start because they have the tag number, and as classes don't get out for another hour, we should have time to check all the parking lots. He looks at me and says, "How do you know this?" I say, "Dad, this is what I do for a living. People steal things and I track them down. I'm especially good at catching employees." We made our way to public safety and explained what happened. They said they didn't have the time to track it down, and I said no worries, that's why I'm here. We went back to the parking lot with the tag number and started walking down the rows looking at all the tags hanging from the rearview mirrors. I found the car 4 rows over and 3 slots west. Dad called campus police and an awesome officer arrived and matched the tag to my dad, not this car. Class was due to get out in about 5 minutes, and we elected to wait for the thief and confront him. My dad is the epitome of you're only worth the deeds you do and takes everything very personal, and if the kind of professor you either love or absolutely hate. We wait for quite some time making jokes and watching the students exit the building into the parking lot. I spot the thief first as he's walking to the parking lot, earbuds in, nose deep in his phone when he glances up and sees us standing around his car. He stops mid-step and does an about-face. I point him out to the officer, and the officer yells for the student to stop and talk. The student stops and turns around. The officer asked if this is his car. The student pauses, shrugs and says yes. The officer asked him if he knew the tag was stolen, and he of course said no. The officer asks where he got it and what year he was. The student claims he's a sophomore and he bought it at the campus parking office. The officer says nope. Impossible because you don't qualify for that tag. Where did you get it? He said he bought it from a friend this morning. Officer asked who the friend was, and the student refused to say. The officer says he's heard enough and that he needs to give the tag to my dad and apologize. He does so and thinks he's free to go. Nope. The officer then proceeds to write tickets. Illegal parking. Improper use of a parking tag. Possession of a stolen tag. The kid's face is going from white to green at this point. He asks if he can leave and the officer says no. The officer has the car towed away at the student's expense. I ask the officer how much that all adds up to, and he says that after the towing, violations and impounding, probably over $2,000. My dad only asks one question. What was that kid's name? The officer tells him. We all shake hands and go our separate ways. Dad and I go grab lunch, and I can tell he's not letting this go. I ask him what he's going to do. He tells me he's going to send an email with the information to the other professors on campus, the dean of students, and overall just blast this kid off campus. I say, remind me never to steal from you. A few weeks go by and I ask Dad for an update. He tells me that the student was expelled 3 days after the incident, and that I did a great job spotting and tracking down the student and tag. I said, Dad, I might not be a rocket scientist or teacher, but tracking people is what I do. That's it, good times. Dad, if you read this, as I know you're a Reddit addict, we should grab lunch when campus opens up again. Story 2. I worked in an emergency room, for 6 years, so I am full of stories. Every person who has worked in the knows that Mondays are the busiest days of the week, and also when all the crazies come out. This day was no different. I worked as a nurse in triage, where you initially get assessed in the front before going to the back. Here we determine who needs to go back first, and who can wait. It's not a first-come, first-serve as most people think. We had a few stretchers in the front for people who needed to be monitored a little closer, or needed EVs, blood draws, labs. There were 6 stretchers, but this day was so busy all 6 stretchers were filled plus 5 more in the hallway. This lady comes in on an ambulance, but because her symptoms did not indicate an emergency, she was put in stretcher triage to wait her turn. She was in a lot of pain. After assessment, I recognized her symptoms as being caused from gallstones. Painful, but not life-threatening. We put her on a stretcher, started in Roman 4, drew labs, and hooked her up to the monitor just in case. A few minutes later, the patient's daughter comes in the front door. One look at her, and we knew she would cause problems. She had everything from the shoes to the haircut. A classic rich Karen. When she saw that her mom was still in the front and hadn't seen a doctor yet, she started screaming that she knew the CEO of the hospital and that we would all be fired if we didn't get her mom back to see a doctor right now. We explained that her mom has a history of gallstones, and even the patient herself was saying that she has had this pain many times because of the gallstones. We explained about being really busy and that there were no rooms available in the back, and we'll get her back as soon as we could. She eventually calmed down but was still antsy. About an hour later, another patient, a critical patient this time, came in and was put in the stretcher beside the patient and her daughter. This patient had worrying complaints, but on initial assessment we could not find anything wrong. Now, as a nurse, you learn to always trust your gut. When your gut sounds like an alarm, you listen. Something about this patient was setting my alarm bells off, but all his vitals were normal, and I had no solid evidence to declare him an emergency. I hooked him up to the monitor and kept a very close eye on him. I let the charge nurse know of my concerns, and she said to let her know as soon as something changes. Not 5 minutes later, something changed. Now, at this time I should explain that this hospital was a level 1 trauma center, meaning we get all the bad cases from car crashes to gunshot victims. We were in the middle of gang territory, since we had to be ready for any traumas, life-threatening injuries. We had a room with 3 beds that was closed off from the rest of the beds, because traumas usually involved a lot of people and a lot of blood. Even on busy days like this one, those rooms were empty unless there was a trauma patient. Now, back to the critical patient. I was taking vital signs of the first patient when I looked over to the critical patient. I noticed a worrying change in his rhythm and stopped with the female patient to start assessing the critical one to see what was going on. That did not sit well with her daughter. She actually grabbed my arm and told me to finish with her mom. I jerked my arm free and said I had to make sure he was okay. As I turned around to the man, his rhythm went into VVIB, life-threatening rhythm. I called the charge nurse to inform her of his condition, all the while unhooking him from the monitor and throwing his bed into drive. As I started pushing him back, the daughter actually jumped in front of the stretcher and stopped it. She's screaming that her mom was here first and needed to be seen before him, and screaming that I was a liar and that she was going to get me fired. I'm usually a mild-tempered person, but knowing the man was literally minutes away from dying, I told the daughter, "You have a choice. Get out of my way or get run over," as I started pushing the stretcher forward. Now, I'm really good at pushing the stretcher fast and getting the patients where they need to go in a hurry. One of the reasons I was part of the trauma team. The daughter tried to stand firm, but she saw I wasn't going to stop and jumped out of the way just as I was an inch from hitting her. Unfortunately, she did not move fast enough, and I ended up running over her foot. At this point, I didn't care and got the patient back to the trauma room, leaving the daughter screaming lying on the floor. We spent about 30 minutes on the critical patient, but he ended up dying. By the time I got back up front, the mom patient and her daughter had been taken to the back to see a doctor, but my charge nurse warned me that they were filing a complaint against me. A few days later, the actual CEO of the hospital came to visit me on my next shift. He was known to be a kind and fair man. Since this happened during a time before cameras were put in the ERs, he had to take what happened from word of mouth. Apparently, the daughter said I assaulted her several times and put her mom's life in danger by not assessing her properly, and that I should be fired. Turned out that the patient did actually have gallstones and nothing else. Also, the daughter's foot was broken due to me running over it. I calmly explained exactly what happened, and that her actions might have ended up in the critical patient dying because of the delay she caused by her actions. When I got to the part of what I said to the daughter, and that I ran over her foot, the CEO actually started laughing and then tried to cover his mouth to hide his laughter. He explained that the daughter was a friend of his sister, and he knows what kind of person she is. Not only did I not get fired, he put a personal note in my file praising my actions. On my next review, I got a large raise plus a bonus thanks to the CEO's note. Story 3. About 20 minutes ago, I'm in Sephora. I had gotten an email with a discount code and figured I'd treat myself to some new makeup for being an adult and getting my vaccine, as well as replacing the rotors on my car. So I'm browsing the eyeshadow, looking for a palette I want but don't already have. I'm wearing a tie-dye tank top, tie-dye bandana in my hair, and a pair of paint-stained jeans from when I helped paint my dad's fence a few days ago. So unless there's some sort of casual Wednesday I'm unaware of, I certainly don't look like an employee. Due to the panorama, you can't test the makeup like normal. This isn't a problem for me. I know what brands I like and work well for me. But apparently, some lady had a huge problem with this, because the next thing I know, there's a tap on my shoulder, so I turn around. I'm face to face with what I can best describe as Mimi, from the Drew Carey Show 2.0. Her face had so much makeup caked onto it. I could see where she applied different shade concealers very clearly, almost like lines on her face. Her eyes were more done up than a fashion couture model during Fashion Week, but were smeared like she had just got done a 4-hour crying session. I want to try that one, as she pointed at a colorful palette. I bet you do. What's that supposed to mean? She said with a sneer. It looks like your eyeshadow could use a touch-up. I replied with a shrug. How dare you insult me? I'll have your job. She even kinda stomped as she said this, like an angry rhinoceros. Good luck with that, but if this is how you treat employees, I'm glad you got me instead. They don't get paid enough to put up with your nonsense. For whatever reason, she's still not convinced that I don't work there, and she stomps off to find a manager, still shrieking about disrespect and how she's never and blah blah. I figure the manager will take it and go back to looking at the palettes. Not so lucky, about a minute later, she comes huffing back, manager in tow, looking like a poor pup who had just been beat. That one, she screams while pointing at me. That's the one who insulted me, and I demand you do something about it right now, she cried, again stomping her feet on the last 2 syllables. The manager looks at me, looks at Mimi, shakes her head and says, Ma'am, she clearly doesn't work here. She's a customer just like you. I'm not sure what you want me to do. I'm sorry if she upset you. But unless she put her hands on you or threatened you, there's not much I can do. Realization slowly washed over the woman, and her face went from being red like a cherry from being angry, to being pink like bubblegum from being embarrassed. She stuttered out half an apology, "Oh, I'm so." Yeah, then said to the manager, "Well, I still want to try that palette." At this point, my mind was made up. There was only one of those palettes left on the floor, and while they might have had more in the back, she was going to wait for it. Without a word, I grabbed the palette and started walking towards the line. Mimi nearly starts crying at this point. Did you see that? Can she do that? I wanted that palette. The manager simply responded, "Ma'am, you asked to sample the palette, and unfortunately right now, due to the redacted, I can't let you do that. As I already stated, she is a customer, and if she wants to buy that palette, she is absolutely allowed. If you're going to keep causing a scene, I'm going to need to ask you to leave." Mimi turned on her heels and went to sulk in the corner of the store. I checked out, and have been sitting in my car waiting for her to leave the store, so I can go back and return this hideous pallet. Screw her. Update: she finally left the store. No bag in hand. I waited for her to exit the parking lot to ensure she didn't see me going back in. When I walked back in the door, the employee watching the door started cracking up. I asked what had happened with Mimi 2.0. Apparently, she was so irate that I took the last one, so she asked to buy the sample. They couldn't let her do that. She then insisted that an employee go check the back and not come out until they've looked everywhere for another one. So they sent an employee in the back, read equals smoke break, to look for nearly 20 minutes. I imagine that the employee had multiple smokes, and after dealing with this lady, I don't blame her. The employee came back and told her they looked everywhere, but they didn't have any more. At this point, Mimi picked up the pallet closest to her and threw it on the ground in protest. The manager told her she would be paying for it and leaving the premises immediately, and if she didn't, they'd be calling the cops. Mimi forked over the money and hustled her ample behind out of the store. At this point, I said, "Man, in that case, I'm glad I waited to see her leave the parking lot before I came to return this." And the employee doubled over with laughter. She thought I was just checking up on the situation. She had no idea I didn't actually want the pallet. Generally, I'm one of the nicest people you'll ever meet. But disrespecting an employee who is just trying to do their job is one surefire way to piss me off. And I have no problem standing up for the person who most likely can't, or chance losing their job. Thank you to all our essential workers. Story 4. I can hardly believe it. I've encountered plenty of entitled people, but none quite like this. It all started this morning. My parents love to plant flowers in their yard, growing everything from hibiscus to water lilies. But their pride and joy are definitely the bougainvilleas. This morning, my mom went outside to water the plants and feed the koi fish. At that moment, our elderly neighbor, who is well into his 80s, came over and struck up a conversation with her. The exchange went something like this. "Neighbor, can I have your bougainvilleas?" 2 of them. Mom puzzled. "Do you mean just a few cuttings to put in a vase?" "Sure." Neighbor, "No, I want to plant them in my yard." Mom, "I'm not sure if they can grow from cuttings. I'll ask a gardener, and if they can, I'd be happy to give you some." Neighbor, "No need. Just dig up yours and plant them in my yard. I have 2 empty spots and thought your bougainvilleas would look nice there." Mom, "What?" Neighbor, "I like the red ones. When can you dig them up and bring them over?" Mom, "I just bought those. I can't give them to you. They're still growing and establishing." Neighbor, "Then let them grow in my yard. No need to wait for them to mature here." Mom, getting frustrated, "Sorry, but no. If you want bougainvilleas, you'll need to go buy them at the plant shop." Our neighbor kept insisting, even dragging my dad into the conversation, demanding they give him the plants for free. When my parents stood their ground, he finally left, muttering under his breath, "Unbelievable." Update: that same neighbor decided to injure another neighbor's dog. I'll update once the dog is back from the veterinary clinic. Update 2. Hey everyone. Sorry for the delayed update. Life has been hectic with all this neighbor drama, and I completely forgot about my account. I don't know if anyone remembers my previous post, but I'm grateful for all your comments and advice. I read almost everything and carefully considered my options. Before I give the latest update, let me answer a few questions people asked. Why isn't he in a retirement home? Well, his entire family lives in the same house with him: 7 sons, 1 daughter, 3 daughters-in-law, 9 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren. Most of them only stay on weekends and holidays, but whenever there's a disturbance, they all get involved. So, people around here generally tolerate him because of the sheer number of relatives who support him. Have the authorities ever been involved? Yes, but since he has family members who can look after him, and because he's physically healthy and mentally sound, it falls outside their jurisdiction. My parents moved into this neighborhood about a year ago, and most of the other residents are long-term homeowners, many of them elderly. Since my parents are new, they don't have much influence here. It's the usual, we've lived here longer than you, and no one had issues before mentality. Now, on to the latest update. The neighbor whose dog was hurt filed a police report and is planning to sue. The meeting they held was supposed to help resolve things peacefully, but one of the elderly man's sons is part of a gang and brought his whole crew to the meeting. You can imagine the chaos that followed. The dog owner came prepared, with photos and videos of the incident, including footage showing the elderly man attempting to dig up my family's plants. They tried to play it off as if it were nothing, but the dog's owner wasn't one to back down. He said, in front of everyone, "Then we'll settle this in court since none of you want to take responsibility or compensate us for what your family member did. Mr. C," referring to my dad, "I'll cover your legal fees, too. Let's both sue him for the trouble he's caused." That's pretty much how the meeting ended. The son didn't want to take responsibility, and the dog's owner wasn't about to back down. Since then, the elderly neighbor hasn't shown his face around. I think he knows he really messed up this time. And, as a side note, the elderly man recently fell while trying to clean a cabinet. He hit his head pretty hard and needed to be hospitalized for a few days and get stitches. Story 5. Many years ago, I worked in the lovely career of retail. It's sadly normal for there to be a constant flow of shop scum that make you despise their existence, and there are those that are so horrific that what they do is burned into your mind forever. Fortunately, one of these unforgettable moments allowed me to extract my revenge. I had only worked in retail for 1 year in this newly built store and was starting to settle in. Getting to know the great customers and understanding that some people shouldn't be allowed outside, which being a shy person who hates conflict wasn't the best, but at least one of my customers was an absolutely adorable elderly woman who always made time to talk and was an absolute joy to be with. It had been some weeks since I had last seen her, but one morning I saw her car park into the disabled parking bay as she already has a blue badge, only this time she hobbled out of the car on crutches with a pot on her leg. I didn't have a chance to talk to her yet when a works truck, which did not have a blue disabled badge, pulled into the disabled space next to her and out jumped an early 40s builder with their teenage kid. Well, this little old lady was having none of this and must have absolutely massive balls of steel and stood up to this ignorant builder and politely informed them that they shouldn't be parking there as it's for the disabled and he doesn't have a badge. What happened next, I can't forget. This builder decided the best course of action was to humiliate and insult this poor elderly lady in crutches, accuse her of faking her disability, and claim the cast on her leg was a fake, and that she probably milks the benefit system for as much money as possible, then walks off putting on an over-dramatic fake limp, laughing away with their teenage kid, whilst the old lady stood there in shock. Sadly, being one who lacks courage, I did absolutely nothing about it, and that would stick with me forever. I tried feebly to ask a manager later to do something about it, but they didn't care or want to get involved. For years, I worked in this store, always seeing this scum builder come in and out. Fortunately, I never interacted with this scum builder, but I saw them often, and every time I did, I would always remember what they had done vividly. I would still see them park in the disabled bays, and even get to the point where I would recognize them by the large blue Mercedes they drove. 7 years later, I was still working in this store, and this scum was still parking in disabled and looking like an absolute jerk. Yet this year I was blessed with good fortune, and our store was outfitted with some absolute joyful equipment. Due to the high number of complaints, our store had set up a company to deal with the parking violations. But instead of having external parties coming in and ticketing cars, the staff of the store were given the ticketing machine, and it was our duty to go to the car park and record any cars that violated the parking rules. This was all done digitally, and there would be no paper tickets upon the cars. This was brilliant. As soon as I found out, I knew what I was going to do. It didn't take long for me to learn how to use the machine, and it certainly didn't take long for the opportunity to get revenge, and so it began. There were 3 rules for parking, and if you break these rules, there is a lovely £80 fine in return each time it happened. The first rule: no parking in disabled without a badge. And I know well that the scum builder is certainly violating this rule, and it wasn't long until I saw him next, and as soon as he entered the store, I quickly scurried out with the ticketing machine, and lo and behold, there was the oversized blue Mercedes in the closest disabled bay, with no badge. I smashed their car details in with some well-shot photos and sent the report off so that they would receive a lovely letter of their fine they would ask to pay. That's not enough though, but fortunately it takes weeks for them to finally receive the ticket, which grants me the opportunity to constantly ticket their parking violations. Because as you would expect, the scum would always park in disabled, and as I worked at the front of the store, I would always know when they had parked. After ticketing their car dozens of times, the scum unfortunately learnt their lesson, as their oversized blue Mercedes no longer appeared in disabled parking bays. But as you expect, the scum would still be scum, and they would find their new parking space inside child parking. Rule 2. Don't park inside child parking without a child. Had this scum gotten enough, I thought? Of course not. They haven't learnt their lesson and continue to be a complete wanker and park in the child parking, which we didn't have many spaces for. At this point, I knew all their car details by heart and would gleefully fill out the ticket machine as I skipped over to their car violating the child parking and take the photos needed for them, including shots of their car seats that bear no child seats in them. And as it became routine, this once again carried on a few weeks more of tickets being created, and eventually they started receiving the fines. Fortunately, me being me, I am completely invisible to others and often looked over, and I have yet to be seen or caught. But as all good things must eventually come to an end, when the scum came into the shop, their blue turd automobile was no longer there in child parking or disabled. Has the scum finally learnt their lesson? Would you be surprised if they had not, as it didn't take me long to find them. Rule 3. You must park inside a marked bay, and what a surprise, the scum still manages to screw this up. They would park over the line, taking 2 spaces up. Well, guess what? That's a job for me and my ticket machine. Trying to park inside a taxi parking, but can't fit the big car in it. Boom, that ain't inside a marked bay, and catching another ticket and fine for the jerk. Have one single wheel slightly over the white line of a bay? Well, guess who technically broke the rule? That's right, Scumbag did. And there goes a few more weeks of fun, until eventually Scumbag runs out of ways that they can possibly break the rules and our company hires externally to start ticketing cars, so my beloved weapon of justice goes to rest. Now I know what people are probably going to say, that all these fines are not enforceable because of blah blah blah. But I honestly don't care for a few reasons. Firstly, I'm being paid to do this, so either way my time or money isn't wasted. Secondly, it did have an effect as they repeatedly changed their parking habits. And thirdly, even if they don't end up paying, they are still going to spend a ton of time and effort trying to overturn them over and over again, having to constantly be harassed by mail. Overall, if all the fines are counted separately and added up, they would have received thousands of pounds worth of fines, building up over time for being scum. Cherry on the top, about 3 years later, I walk by this piece of scum in the car park and watch as they scream at some innocent dude in a high-vis jacket, accusing them for being the one giving them all parking fines, which put me at peace knowing this must have seriously got to them and cost them to still be raving mad after 3 years. Story 6. I am a 17-year-old girl who has been in a relationship with my boyfriend, who is an 18-year-old guy, for about a year. I am a senior in high school, involved in sports, maintaining good grades, and working a job. My parents are very set in their ways. When my boyfriend and I started dating, they barely made an effort to get to know him or his family. Over the past year, they've only met his family twice. Once at prom, the most recent occasion, and another time when they happened to see me at a restaurant with his family. They walked up, said a quick hello to me without introducing themselves, and then walked away. As I get older, they seem increasingly jealous of my relationship with other people, especially my boyfriend and his family, and they always refer to them as strangers. My parents have always brought a lot of negativity into my life. Even as a young kid, I sense that we wouldn't have a close relationship as adults. They often speak to me in a condescending way, but deny doing so when I bring it up. They get angry at me for not being at home or for not telling them everything. Even though I worry that anything I say could lead to punishment, I feel like I'm constantly walking on eggshells around them. They also manipulate me with money, promising to buy me a car if I go to college. But if I even mention considering a different path, they immediately say, "There goes your car." As for why my boyfriend doesn't like them, if all that wasn't already enough reason, he's had the chance to witness some of these situations firsthand. One night, my parents thought he had left, so they called me downstairs for a talk. When I went downstairs, they started calling me lazy and dishonest. My boyfriend, who was still upstairs, heard them yelling at me and calling me all these terrible things. I returned to him, visibly upset and in tears. The following day, my parents had another talk with me. This time, they said that if I don't go to college, I'll need to make enough money to move out or I can't live here. They also repeated a lot of the same things from the previous night, even saying that when they ask me to do things, they're not asking me to cure some impossible disease. They got upset because I started crying, saying that's all I ever do. These kinds of conversations have been going on for years and continue to this day. I try my best to respect their rules, as I am still a minor living under their roof. They constantly tell me to hang out with my boyfriend less and spend more time at home with them, which I understand is what most parents would want. But I struggle to want to spend time with them when they continually treat me this way. My boyfriend's parents tried to give my parents the benefit of the doubt until about 3 months ago. I was swimming with my boyfriend and his sister when my mom suddenly showed up at my boyfriend's house. She got out of the car, yelled for me to come home, slammed her car door, and drove off. All of this happened simply because I hadn't answered my phone while we were in the pool. After that, his parents lost a lot of respect for my mom, as they saw her behavior as extremely disrespectful. In the last 4 to 5 months, my boyfriend has stopped coming around my house altogether because he's never felt welcome here, and he doesn't agree with how my parents treat me. When these conflicts with my parents happen, I started going to my aunt for support. I even asked if I could stay with her a few times. She encouraged me to tell her what was going on and assured me that I could trust her. She even spoke to my parents, trying to explain how I felt and urging them to change their behavior. My boyfriend would also share his perspective with her whenever something happened. About 3 weeks ago, though, things reached a breaking point. I was feeling really low and even suicidal, so I confided in my boyfriend, who then told his mom, who works in a hospital psychiatric department. She advised that, for my safety, I might want to go to the local fire department to seek help if I felt comfortable doing so. I decided to take her advice and went. When I got into the ambulance, my parents were contacted, and my mom called me, asking what was going on. She then said, "Do you know how many times I have stood up for you?" I tried to brush it off since this reaction was, unfortunately, typical for her. After I got home from the hospital, my parents had multiple discussions with me, mainly expressing their anger that my boyfriend's parents hadn't called them. Honestly, I would have been upset if they had. My parents don't even have my boyfriend's parents' phone number, as they've never made an effort to connect with them. As a result, they placed a new restriction on me. I am now only allowed to spend 4 hours at a time at my boyfriend's house. I respect their rules since I am a minor, but it feels like they're making things unnecessarily difficult. I also recently learned that, on the night I came back from the hospital, my aunt stayed at our house and told my mom everything that my boyfriend had shared with her, including the accusation that he had called my parents abusive, which he never did. Now, my parents are upset that I shared my concerns with what they call strangers instead of them. I recently started seeing a therapist, and my parents even tried to attend my first session to tell her what they really think is going on. What are your honest thoughts on this? My boyfriend has been nothing but supportive since the day we met, and has been incredibly understanding regarding the challenges my parents put me through. It feels like he sees right through their behavior.